It was an ordinary Tuesday morning when the news came in that President Donald Trump was planning a surprise visit to the upscale, celebrity-owned restaurant Le Cordon Rouge in Manhattan. The restaurant was known for its impeccable culinary standards, its famous chef, Marco Delacorte, and its exclusive atmosphere. Marco had built an empire from scratch, turning his small French bistro into one of the most sought-after dining experiences in New York City. But Marco wasn't your typical chef. He had strong principles, and one of them was his no-entry policy. This policy was no ordinary restaurant rule, it was a statement. No one, not even the most influential figures in the country, was allowed behind the kitchen doors unless they were part of the culinary team. The policy was born out of Marco's belief that the kitchen was the sacred heart of the restaurant. It was a place of creativity, precision, and respect. No distractions, no interferences. The atmosphere in that kitchen was delicate, and the last thing Marco wanted was for anyone to disrupt the harmony of his chefs at work. When Marco first heard the news that President Trump wanted a personal kitchen tour, he didn't flinch. He'd been in the business long enough to know that high-profile figures often made these requests. But this time it was different. It wasn't just any VIP guest. It was the sitting President of the United States. News outlets were abuzz with the announcement, and social media went wild, with some supporting Marco's right to uphold his rules, while others questioned whether he should bend them for such a powerful figure. As Marco sat in his office, contemplating the situation, he couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. There was something about Trump's visit that didn't sit right with him. His kitchen was not a place for a political spectacle. It wasn't just about the policy. It was about preserving the integrity of his craft. Still, Marco knew he had a decision to make. Should he hold his ground or give in to the pressure of hosting the president? Later that afternoon, Marco received a call from his manager, Lisa. "Marco," she said, "the president's people are here. They're insisting on a tour of the kitchen and they're not taking no for an answer. They're saying it's part of the deal for the visit. You know what this means, right? The press will be all over it." Marco sighed deeply, running a hand through his salt and pepper hair. He had built Le Cordon Rouge with his blood, sweat, and tears, and now he was being asked to compromise everything he stood for. It wasn't about political beliefs. It was about respect for his craft. He had trained his entire team to follow strict protocols in the kitchen. The president's visit was already a huge distraction, but allowing him into the heart of the restaurant would completely shift the dynamic. "I don't want to make this about politics," Lisa, Marco said, his voice calm but resolute. "But I've spent my whole career building this restaurant on one principle: the kitchen is off limits to anyone who doesn't belong there. Not even celebrities or politicians." Lisa paused. She knew Marco's principles well and understood that once his mind was made up, there was no changing it. Still, she could sense the tension in the air. "I'll let them know, Marco. But you should be prepared. They won't back down easily. It could get ugly." Marco stood up from his desk and walked over to the window. He could see the crowds gathering outside the restaurant, the security teams, and the flashing cameras. This wasn't just any visit, it was an event. The eyes of the nation were on him. He knew the decision he made today would be more than just a policy statement, it would be a defining moment in his career. But Marco didn't care about fame or accolades. He cared about preserving his artistry. The kitchen was sacred and no amount of pressure would make him abandon his values. The next day, the atmosphere in Le Cordon Rouge was electric with anticipation. The staff was on high alert, preparing for what was to be the most high-profile visit in the restaurant's history. The usual hum of conversation among the kitchen staff was replaced with hushed whispers and nervous energy. Even the seasoned sous chefs who had worked with Marco for years felt the weight of the occasion. Outside, the security presence was intense. Secret Service agents, federal agents, and local NYPD officers filled the streets, cordoning off the area and ensuring that no one would get too close to the building. Helicopters could be seen hovering above, monitoring the scene from above. The media frenzy was already in full swing, with cameras poised to capture every moment. Lisa, who had been on the phone all morning with the president's security team, was pacing in the dining area, checking every detail. She couldn't afford any slip-ups today. She had been working with Marco for over 5 years and had witnessed his growth from a small-time chef to a Michelin-starred culinary genius. But even she was unsure how Marco would handle this visit. She walked back to Marco's office and knocked on the door. He was sitting behind his desk, deep in thought, staring out the window. The usual calmness in his demeanor had been replaced by an intensity she hadn't seen before. Marco, she said softly, the president's motorcade is just around the corner. They'll be here in 5 minutes. Marco didn't respond immediately. He was weighing his options, trying to figure out how this would all play out. But as he looked out the window and saw the security convoy approaching, he knew that the time to make a decision had passed. This was no longer just about a kitchen policy, it was about something much larger. His restaurant was being thrust into the national spotlight. Whatever happened next would set a precedent for his future and possibly for the entire culinary world. Let's make sure the kitchen is ready, Lisa, Marco said, standing up and heading toward the back of the restaurant. But make one thing clear to them, no one is entering the kitchen. Not even the president. Lisa hesitated, then nodded. Understood, Marco. I'll let them know. As Marco walked through the back hallways, he could hear the low hum of the kitchen, a familiar sound that brought him a sense of comfort in this moment of uncertainty. The staff had already started preparing the evening's meal, working in perfect harmony, moving with precision and purpose. This was their world, a place where excellence was non-negotiable. The kitchen was their domain, their creative space. And Marco was their leader, guiding them with steady hands. Marco entered the kitchen where his team had gathered around the central workstations. They all stopped what they were doing and turned toward him. The tension in the air was palpable, and Marco could see the concern in their eyes. He was their captain, but they knew this was a moment that could change everything. All right, everyone, Marco said, his voice calm but firm. We've worked hard to get here. Today we're going to show the world what we're made of. But I need you all to stay focused. The president is here, but he doesn't get to walk through our kitchen. That's non-negotiable. His words resonated with the team. The quiet murmur of approval spread through the kitchen like wildfire. They respected Marco's decision even though they all knew the consequences could be significant. As the final preparations were being made, Lisa rushed into the kitchen, her face a mix of anxiety and determination. Marco, they're here. They want to head straight to the kitchen. The president is insisting on a tour. Marco took a deep breath, his eyes narrowing. Lisa, you know what to do. She nodded and quickly turned to head out, but Marco called her back for a moment. Tell them I'll meet them in the dining room, he said firmly. And let them know that the kitchen is off limits. I'm not backing down. Lisa hesitated, knowing that the president's team would not take kindly to this message. But she understood Marco's resolve. She nodded once more and rushed out to deliver the news. Moments later, Lisa returned to Marco's side, looking pale. They're furious, Marco. The president's team insists on entering. They've made it clear that this is a deal-breaker. If you refuse, they might cancel the visit altogether. Marco didn't flinch. The kitchen stays off limits. He turned back to his team, who were all watching him, waiting for his next move. Everyone stay sharp. We keep working like we always do. Let them do whatever they want. But we do not compromise our standards. As the sound of footsteps echoed from the dining room, Marco felt the weight of the situation bearing down on him. The door to the dining room swung open and Lisa stepped inside, followed by a group of Secret Service agents. And then there he was, President Donald Trump, walking into the restaurant with his trademark confidence. The air shifted the moment Trump entered. The room seemed to hold its breath. His presence was commanding, his entourage filling the space behind him. He extended his hand toward Marco, who shook it firmly, though his gaze remained unwavering. Chef Delacorte, Trump said, his voice booming, it's an honor to be here. I've heard so much about your food, and I have to say, I'm looking forward to seeing your operation up close. Marco nodded politely but kept his distance. Thank you, Mr. President. I appreciate the visit, but as I mentioned, my kitchen is off limits. Trump's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. Is that so? I thought we could take a quick tour. A president needs to see how things are run, don't you think? Marco remained calm. Mr. President, the kitchen is where we create. We need privacy and focus. I run a tight ship here, and I ask that you respect our work. The room fell into an uncomfortable silence. Trump's expression hardened, but he held his ground, refusing to back down. Are you telling me that the President of the United States can't even see your kitchen? What kind of chef does that? Marco didn't flinch. The kind that takes pride in his craft and doesn't bend to pressure. The room was thick with tension as Marco's words hung in the air. The Secret Service agents positioned themselves subtly around the space, eyes sharp and alert, but there was a noticeable discomfort in their stance. The president wasn't accustomed to being refused, especially not in his own country and certainly not by someone who wasn't part of the political establishment. The standoff was palpable. Donald Trump, never one to shy away from a confrontation, eyed Marco with a mixture of disbelief and irritation. The glare from the president's steely blue eyes could cut through steel, but Marco remained unfazed. He knew this moment could either make or break him. It wasn't just about his restaurant, it was about standing up for his values, his team, and the sanctity of his kitchen. Trump took a slow step forward, clearly trying to regain control of the situation. You know, Chef Delacorte, I've toured some of the finest kitchens in the world. And they all understand the importance of allowing the president a little access. It's a sign of respect. Marco's lips tightened, but his voice remained calm. Respect, Mr. President, isn't about access. It's about recognizing boundaries. You have your role, I have mine. You've been elected to lead this country, and I've worked tirelessly to lead this restaurant. But that doesn't mean I'll let anyone walk in and interfere with what happens in my kitchen. A sharp breath escaped from Lisa as she watched the exchange unfold. The president wasn't backing down, and neither was Marco. She had seen Marco stand firm in the face of criticism before, but this was something else. The president's ego was massive, and Marco was standing in front of it without flinching. She knew there was no turning back now. Trump's face flushed with anger, his fingers tapping against the armrest of the chair he had now seated himself in. I'm not some random VIP chef. I'm the President of the United States. This restaurant is lucky to have a visit from someone of my stature. You're making a huge mistake. Lisa quickly interjected, trying to mediate. Mr. President, Chef Delacorte has been clear about his policy. The kitchen is off limits. Enough. Trump snapped, his voice rising. I didn't come all the way here to be denied access. I'm the president. This is outrageous. The tension in the room escalated. The agents were on high alert, their hands inching toward their holsters, but they did nothing to intervene. They understood the gravity of the situation. Trump was not used to being defied, but this was not just about the president's ego, it was about Marco's deep-rooted principles. Marco, seeing that the situation could spiral out of control, took a slow step toward Trump. He didn't raise his voice, but his words were firm and unwavering. Mr. President, I have built this place from the ground up. Every single dish that leaves this kitchen is the result of years of hard work and dedication. I respect you, but I will not allow you to undermine the integrity of my team or my work. For a moment, it seemed as though the room stood still. The weight of Marco's words hung in the air, reverberating with unspoken truth. Lisa watched as the president's face tightened, his usual bravado faltering for just a second. Trump was a man who prided himself on control, on being the one who made decisions, not the one who had to accept a no. But Marco wasn't intimidated. He knew that this was a test of will, not just between him and the president, but between two contrasting ideologies. One that was about power, prestige, and influence, and the other about passion, integrity, and respect for the craft. The silence was broken by the sound of Trump's sharp, almost mocking laugh. I see. So, you're willing to let this entire thing go south over a kitchen tour, he sneered. I'm willing to lose this entire event for the principal, Marco replied calmly, locking eyes with Trump. My kitchen is not for show. It's where we create, where we work with precision. You wouldn't let someone walk into your Oval Office and disrupt your work. I don't let anyone disrupt mine. Trump's face darkened as he processed Marco's words. He had always been the one in control, the one who commanded respect through power and authority. But Marco's defiance left him with little recourse. He couldn't back down. It would be a blow to his ego, to his sense of dominance. He had to win this, one way or another. Well, I'm not one to be disrespected, Trump said, his tone suddenly shifting to one of warning. If you think this will end without consequences, Chef Delacorte, think again. I'll make sure everyone knows who you are and how you refused a sitting president. You'll be remembered for this. Marco didn't flinch. I'm not afraid of being remembered for standing up for what's right. A long, uncomfortable silence followed. Trump's team exchanged glances, unsure of how to proceed. Lisa, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of disbelief and worry, could see the storm brewing. This wasn't just a matter of a kitchen tour anymore, it was about pride, power, and control. Mr. President, Lisa said cautiously, trying to diffuse the tension. We can arrange for a different experience for you. There's a private table prepared and Marco has already planned a special menu for the occasion. We're honored to have you here, but we ask for your understanding on this matter. Trump glared at Lisa, his nostrils flaring. It was clear he was not pleased with her suggestion. But after a long pause, he stood up, pushing the chair back with force. His eyes never left Marco. This isn't over, Chef, Trump said with a tight-lipped smile. his voice laced with barely contained fury. I'm going to make sure people hear about your little policy. With that, he turned and walked out of the room, his entourage following closely behind. The door slammed shut behind them, leaving an eerie silence in its wake. Marco stood still for a moment, taking a deep breath. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't let the anger show. He had made his choice. The clash had been inevitable, but it was done. His team had stood by him, and that's what mattered most. Lisa walked over to Marco, her eyes filled with sympathy. Marco, are you okay? Marco nodded slowly, a slight smile tugging at the corner of his lips. I'm more than okay, Lisa. I'm proud of what we did here today. We didn't back down. The atmosphere at Le Cordon Rouge was heavy as the hours passed since the standoff with President Trump. The kitchen, usually filled with the clattering sounds of pans and the rhythmic chopping of knives, had fallen into an unusual silence. Every member of Marco's team could sense the weight of what had just transpired. The event was being talked about across the city, and no one knew exactly how the fallout would unfold. Lisa sat in Marco's office, her fingers tapping nervously against her phone as she scrolled through the social media posts flooding in. The reaction was mixed, with some praising Marco's bravery for standing his ground, while others criticized him for turning down a rare opportunity to be in the president's favor. The media had caught wind of the incident, and it was rapidly becoming a headline. On one hand, Marco had garnered admiration from a large portion of the culinary world for sticking to his principles. On the other hand, he knew that the president's influence was not to be underestimated. The implications of turning down Trump could lead to an economic backlash, from loss of business to potential boycotts. Lisa could only imagine the pressure Marco was under now. When Marco finally entered the office, his expression was calm, but there was an underlying tension in his eyes. He had expected the controversy, but facing it head-on was something else entirely. It had been hours since the president left, but Marco knew this battle was just beginning. Lisa, Marco said, his voice steady. What's the situation? Lisa hesitated. The media's blowing up. Some are calling you a hero, others are calling it a huge mistake. I've seen a lot of mixed reviews online. People are shocked, but a lot of chefs are standing with you. Marco took a seat across from her, running his hand through his hair as he thought carefully. I didn't want this to become about politics, Lisa. I wanted it to be about integrity. We've built something here, and I don't want to lose that over a single moment. I get it, Marco, Lisa replied, her voice full of empathy. You've always been about your team, about protecting your work. But you can't deny that what happened today was a big deal. People are still processing it. Outside, the sound of phones ringing, reporters clamoring for statements, and the chatter of the press could be heard through the thin walls. It was a sign that the media frenzy was far from over. The question was no longer whether Marco would be remembered for standing his ground. The question was how his decision would impact the future of his restaurant. At that moment, the door to the office opened and one of Marco's sous chefs, Luca, stepped in with a concerned expression on his face. Marco, Luca said, his voice low, we've got a problem. There's a protest outside. Protest? Marco echoed, standing up. What do you mean? Luca's eyes flickered toward the window. A group of people. They're outside, chanting. It's not peaceful. They're demanding you apologize for what you did to the president. Marco's stomach sank. He knew that this would happen, but seeing it materialize before him was something else entirely. He walked over to the window, peering outside. A small crowd had gathered outside the restaurant's doors. Some of them were holding signs, others were shouting his name, some in anger and others in support. The chant echoed in the streets, rising above the noise of the city. Chef Marco, apologize. Respect the president. Marco's jaw clenched, but he took a deep breath, steadying himself. This was the moment where he had to show his team that he wouldn't back down. Not now, not ever. He turned back to Lisa and Luca. Call security. Keep the protesters at bay. We won't let this disrupt the work we do here. I won't apologize. I'll stand by my decision. Luca nodded, understanding the gravity of Marco's words. We'll handle it, but I think we need to prepare for more attention. It's only going to grow. Just as he finished speaking, Marco's phone rang. He picked it up, glancing at the screen. It was an unknown number. Marco Delacorte, he answered, trying to sound calm despite the chaos unfolding around him. A deep, gravelly voice responded on the other end. Marco, this is Robert Sullivan, Chief of Staff at the White House. I need you to understand something. What happened today, it's not just about the kitchen. The president feels disrespected and that has consequences. Marco's grip on the phone tightened. He wasn't intimidated, but the weight of Sullivan's words was undeniable. I've been informed that you refuse to allow the president into your kitchen. We can't let that go unnoticed. I suggest you issue an apology or this situation will escalate. The president doesn't take kindly to being disregarded. Marco's voice remained firm. I stand by my decision, Mr. Sullivan. I won't apologize for protecting my team and my kitchen. If the president can't respect that, then that's his issue, not mine. Sullivan's tone hardened. You don't understand the gravity of the situation, Marco. This isn't just about you and the president. This is about national image, and the president's office does not take kindly to challenges like this. The conversation hung in the air for a moment, Marco weighing his next words carefully. Then I guess we'll see how it plays out, Mr. Sullivan. But I won't back down. Sullivan's voice dropped to a low, almost menacing tone. We'll see, Chef. We'll see. The line went dead and Marco stood still for a moment, his mind racing. He had just been warned. And while he wasn't afraid, he could feel the storm gathering, not just outside on the streets, but in the broader political arena. The president's office had taken note, and that meant the pressure on him was only going to increase. Lisa watched Marco closely, sensing the burden he now carried. Marco, are you sure about this? This could get ugly. I'm sure, Lisa, he replied, his voice resolute. This is bigger than just me, and it's bigger than the president. This is about standing up for what's right. Just as Marco turned away to address his staff, the door swung open again. This time it was a reporter, camera crew in tow, pushing past the security to speak with him directly. Chef Delacorte, the reporter called out, his camera light flashing. How do you feel about the president's refusal to accept your no-entry policy in the kitchen? Is this the beginning of a political battle that you're willing to fight? Marco took a deep breath and walked toward the reporter. The world was watching, and this moment would define him no matter what happened next. The media circus outside Le Cordon Rouge had only intensified over the past few hours. The protesters were still chanting, a mix of angered voices demanding an apology from Marco and others shouting words of support for the chef's stance. The crowds had begun to draw more attention, with the spectacle becoming a focal point for the media. Reporters and news cameras gathered around the block, eager to catch a glimpse of Marco or anyone who could speak on the dramatic clash that had captured the nation's attention. Inside the restaurant, Marco felt the pressure building. The kitchen was still working, and the staff moved with quiet determination as they always did, despite the storm outside. They were professionals, and that was what Marco needed from them more than anything now. As the reporter's camera flashed in front of Marco, he stood tall, refusing to show any sign of doubt. The weight of the situation pressed on his shoulders, but Marco had already made his decision. There would be no apology. Chef Delacorte, the reporter pressed, his voice rising with eagerness. Do you regret your decision to refuse President Trump's access to your kitchen? You're now a symbol of defiance. But at what cost? Marco stood still for a moment, looking the reporter in the eye. The words he would say now would either solidify his legacy or lead to his downfall. He took a deep breath before responding. I don't regret my decision, Marco said, his voice calm but resolute. What happened today was not about politics. It was about respecting boundaries, about standing up for what I've built. I didn't refuse access to the president because I wanted to make a political statement. I did it because my kitchen is my sanctuary. It's where my team and I work, create, and put everything we have into the food we serve. It's not a stage for anyone, not even the president, to make a spectacle. The reporter's eyes widened at the clarity and confidence in Marco's words. But don't you see? By refusing him, you've essentially made this a political issue. The president feels disrespected, and there are people who are already calling for consequences. This could hurt your business. Marco nodded slowly, acknowledging the reporter's point. He knew that by standing his ground, he was potentially jeopardizing his reputation, his restaurant, and the future of his team. But there were some things worth fighting for. I understand the risks, Marco continued, his voice steady. But I believe integrity is more important than anything else. Could have caved in. I could have apologized and let the president take his tour, but that would have been a disservice to the work we do here every day. I've built this restaurant on honesty, hard work, and respect for the craft of cooking. I won't let that be compromised by anyone, no matter who they are. As Marco spoke, Lisa and Luca stood in the background, watching intently. Marco's unwavering determination was something that inspired them both. They knew that this wasn't just about the kitchen. This was about standing firm in the face of overwhelming pressure, about maintaining one's principles no matter the cost. Outside, the protesters grew more vocal, their chants growing louder as the evening approached. Marco knew that it wasn't just about the media attention now. It was about how he would navigate the consequences that were bound to come. He had made an enemy of the most powerful man in the country, and that was something no one in the restaurant business had ever done. At least not in recent history. The phone on Marco's desk buzzed. He picked it up and saw that it was Lisa, who had stepped outside to handle the crowd. She sounded breathless as she spoke into the receiver. "Marco, we've got trouble. The Secret Service is here. They're saying the president wants to speak to you." Marco's heart skipped a beat. The moment he had been dreading had arrived. He had hoped that the president would let the matter go, but now it was clear that Trump wouldn't back down so easily. "I'm on my way," Marco said, hanging up and standing up from his chair. The pressure of the situation weighed heavily on him, but he was determined to finish this on his own terms. He made his way to the restaurant's front door, where a group of agents stood, blocking the way for anyone to approach the building. The air was thick with the tension of the moment as Marco walked up to them, his gaze locked ahead. Lisa stood beside him, her expression filled with concern. "I'm not sure how this is going to go," she murmured quietly. "The president isn't known for being forgiving, especially when he's publicly embarrassed." "I'll handle it," Marco replied, his voice steady. He wasn't sure what would happen next, but one thing was certain: he wasn't going to back down now. As Marco walked toward the front of the building, he could see the black SUVs parked along the curb, a sign of the Secret Service's presence. The door to one of the vehicles opened and out stepped Robert Sullivan, the White House chief of staff, his expression hard and unreadable. "Chef Delacorte," Sullivan said, his tone clipped. "The president is requesting that you meet him for a private conversation. He wants to resolve this issue before it escalates further." Marco didn't hesitate. He had already made his stance clear, but this was his chance to end this on his own terms. "Tell the president I'm happy to meet with him," Marco replied, his voice firm. "But I'm not apologizing. Not now, not ever." Sullivan's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded curtly. "Very well. The president is waiting for you inside." The air inside the SUV was cool, but the tension between Marco and Sullivan was palpable as they made their way toward the White House. Marco wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew that this conversation would define everything that followed. As they arrived at the White House, Marco was ushered into a private room where Trump waited. The room was filled with an air of finality, and Marco could feel the weight of the moment hanging over him. The president stood by the window, staring out at the evening sky. "Marco," Trump said, turning to face him as Marco entered. "You're a brave man. I'll give you that." Marco stood tall, his posture unwavering. "I'm not here to fight with you, Mr. President. I'm here because I believe in what I stand for. And that's something I won't apologize for." Trump studied Marco for a moment, his lips curling into a slight smile. "I admire your resolve, Chef. But you've got to understand that there are consequences for defying me." "I've been through consequences before," Marco replied, meeting Trump's gaze. "But standing up for what's right is more important than anything." Trump chuckled softly, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "You're a lot more stubborn than I thought, Marco. I respect that." With that, the conversation came to a quiet end. Marco didn't know what would happen next, but he had stood his ground. And in that moment, he knew that he had made the right decision. As Marco left the White House later that evening, he felt a sense of peace settle over him. No matter how this played out, he had done what he believed in. And for the first time that day, the weight of the world didn't feel quite so heavy.